going with it. So once again, before we start, don't forget to use the chat a fair amount. And we're just going to start off here at the top, Jared, and introduce people who's in the class. We have 12 students, and Katie, you're on. Katie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. There you go.
Let me see if I can.
There you
Can you
are.
see me? Okay, awesome. My name is Katie Hoffmeister. I am a senior sustainability major, and I'm really interested in the wildlife along, I guess, the Ohio River Greenway, and I have the town of Clarksville. And whenever we went to Origin Park, we learned about a flying squirrel population that they have there in like the forested areas. So I'm just curious about, I guess, other unique forms of wildlife that Clarksville has.
All right. Colin.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can.
Okay. Hi, my name is Colin. I'm a biochemistry major here at U of L. I'm working with Jeffersonville. And my question probably is, how maybe did they handle in the past centuries deforestation, as they were maybe in earlier centuries, they were colonizing further into west into the U.S. But then even after that, how did they handle things like deforestation, managing the environmental safety, stuff like that?
All right. Thank you. Forrest. Forrest, are you there? Oh, here we are. I think you're on mute, Forrest. Right. We'll come back to you, Forrest. Lexi.
Hi, my name is Lexi Brooks, and I'm a junior biology major. I have Clarksville, and when we visited, I remember them talking about there were several like Native American tribes that had different like sets of history. So I was just wondering if you had any experience with that and how to like tell those stories all at the same time, yet they're different.
Thank you, Lexi. Luke McFarland.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke McFarland. I'm a senior individualized major and I'm pre-pharmacy. My river town is Jeffersonville. And one thing that interests me about the history of the Ohio River and the towns would be infrastructure, specifically like the bridges, like what goes into building the bridges. Like for me specifically, we have the Big Four Bridge. And I remember a time where it didn't connect to Indiana, it just stopped and you had to turn around. So just kind of the history with the bridges and that aspects.
Well, why, thank you. Luke Schroeder.
Hi there, my name is Luke Schroeder, and I'm a junior biology major. I haven't heard a ton about it, but I'm a little bit interested just how the banks have changed, if the Ohio has kind of changed shape over the course of history for some of these river towns. I'm Jeffersonville specifically.
Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a senior neuroscience major. I'm working with Jeffersonville as well. And one of the things that I would be interested in learning about is like in the early settlement of like Louisville and the surrounding towns like Jeffersonville, New Albany, just kind of how people dispersed in like the first waves of people moving west.
Stevie.
Hi, I'm Stevie, and I have Clarksville also, and I was wondering, I remember learning about, or I guess I'm a biology major, senior biology major, and I was wondering about the fire that happened. I think it was 1921. They said it destroyed like a large part of the town, and I'm curious about what impact that ultimately had on the city.
Vin.
Hi, my name is Vin. I am a second-year accounting student, and I'm working on the river town of New Albany. And one of the things I'm interested about is because of its location on the river during the Civil War, it was boycotted by both sides of the war. So the Confederacy boycotted them because they were in a Union state. the Union boycotted them because they were thought to be too friendly to the South. So I think the location kind of made it a bit of a stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Hey, Zach.
My name's Zach. I'm a senior biology major, and I'm also working with New Albany with Vin. And I was also curious about the Civil War because I know the Paget Museum puts on a Civil War exhibit, and they also have the Town Clock Church, which was a big part of the Underground Railroad.
We'll try Forrest. Well, Forrest, it sounds like you might have computer problems today. You could text in if you want to. Did I miss anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Well, as we, oh, here we are. Forrest, are you there? Well, he's writing in the chat. Okay. So once again, here is Forrest. He's a second-year political science student, and his machinery is just not working today. Anyway, please use the chat. Ask all these questions. We save them. We'll send all the chat and a copy of this video on to Jared afterwards. And so please type in anything you are curious about. Mr. Barrett works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and is an archaeologist and a historian. And his role is to really interact with all of the projects that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers implements in the Ohio River Basin. I'm not sure if it's much wider than that. I mean, maybe it's the Midwest. Well, we'll find that out in a minute. But when they study projects, you know, to do, they have to make a pretty clear assessment of what the impact would be on the historical resources because they want to do no harm. And so Mr. Barrett gets to explore, read, investigate communities near and by Army Corps projects. I'm not sure if that's an accurate description of your work, but we look forward to your comments, and you're on. Take it away.
Okay. Thanks, David, for that introduction. Yeah, it's pretty close, but I'll get into a little bit about, but maybe just briefly mention some of the laws that cover why the Corps hires archaeologists in the first place. We have this federal preservation law, National Historic Preservation Act. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as Section 106. That law was passed in 1966, and basically any federal they call it a federal undertaking. So anytime there's a permit or ground disturbance or anything that's funded through the federal government, they must show that they call this historic properties. No historic properties will be impacted by the project. So a lot of times I work in the planning division for the Corps in Louisville District, and before they can even turn dirt or get a permit or do anything, spend the money, they have to acknowledge or determine if there are any historic properties present. So my job as an archaeologist is to identify if anything is present within the area they are planning to work in. So David and I met as part of that process. We were on Beargrass Creek. We were in the canoe together, and he saved me. The canoe tipped over, but he pulled me out. But we were up and down the river trying to identify those historic properties. So we also have another law called the National Environmental Protection Act. That's called NEPA usually, and a lot of you have probably heard of that term or that acronym. And that's just another environmental law that we also have to follow. And we have to acknowledge that one is broader than HPA. You have to acknowledge, you have to go look at wetlands, streams, endangered species, socioeconomic impacts. There's just all sorts of different things that get accounted for that. So that's just a brief history of what I do for the Corps. I heard a lot of questions today from in the various backgrounds. So I look forward to maybe even touching on some of those at the end. I wrote some of them down, and please feel free to re-ask those questions when we get near the end. But thank you all for joining us today. What I'll do is I'm just going to start. I'm going to show a brief. You said I could share the screen, David. Is that correct? Is it showing it? Let me see if I can. I want to show a map of the core of our district.
It's down on the bottom of the screen there.
Bottom
It
of
says
the
share,
screen. Okay.
says share screen.
I'm looking. Okay, let me see.
And the biggest ticket is that you have to figure out what screen you want to share.
Oh, okay. I'm looking. The recording, virtual background. Oh, share screen. Okay. Full screen, scale. Okay, let's see if we can. Oh. No.
What should happen is when you click it, something's going on.
Yeah, I know. Let's see if it shows. Hold on. I'm hoping this shows up. I was trying to show the map, but sorry about this. Let's see if this one worked. Oh, there it was. Okay. Does everybody see the map?
No, but what you have to probably do is when you hit share screen, then
Okay.
you select the open screen that you have that you want to share. And then
Okay.
down on the right-hand side at the bottom, there's a thing saying share.
Okay. Let me see if I can do that.
Otherwise, you can just talk.
Okay, well, we might just end up doing that. Maybe we can come to it later. Anyway, so stretching from the confluence of the Allegheny and the Monongahela River. So you all know this because you're studying the Ohio River, but it goes all the way from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Cairo, Illinois, river mile, and it's 981 miles long. Lots of smaller rivers and creeks drain into it. The Ohio River has been central to the history of the region and the nation as a corridor for transportation and trade, including prehistory. People have been using the Ohio River for at least 12,500 years before present. You'll also hear the term BC. Indigenous peoples have been using the river, and there's 4 different time periods typically associated with the prehistoric people that used the river. So you have the Paleo-Indian period, and these are the first people. You might hear the land bridge going over Bering Strait in Alaska. They came down from there, settled the area, and these were more like bands of small families or extended families that would hunt the Pleistocene fauna. Then you have the Archaic period, and that usually stretches from 10,000 BP all the way up to 3,000 BP. That's when you start seeing more settlement. They started getting more into villages. They started to become more settled and just get more organized. They would have more burials, more rituals, more traditions. Then you have the woodland period, traditionally from 3,000 BP to 1,000 BP. And that's when you start getting your mounds. You might see woodland mounds constructed. You'll also see the introduction of the bow and arrow. That was a big one. Also agriculture. Then you have the last one, Mississippian period, and that takes you all the way up through European context. So about 1,000 BP up until about 350, 1600 AD. We'll start saying AD, 1600 or 350 before present. So as you can see, there's a rich prehistoric history in the area. And if you go, why is my computer? I'm sorry. I'm trying to get back to the video so I can see y'all. Froze up. Anyway.
If you want to take some time and see if you can get the screen, if your PowerPoint really is that more effective.
Let me see. Yeah, let me see. Sorry, y'all.
We are ever patient.
Okay, good. Oh.
So once again, if you go to share screen.
Yeah, I got to get back to the Zoom screen first. For some reason, when I pulled up all my graphics, it's freezing I can hear y'all, and it sounds like y'all can hear me, but I
Yeah, we can
cannot.
hear you fine. We can see you, matter of fact. So
Okay, good. That's good.
you have a very
Yes.
nice painting in your background.
Yeah, that's the rooster. Oh, it's not responding. Okay. Well, I will just keep talking, but even before, like I said, we covered the 4 periods. Traditionally, the indigenous peoples would use dugout canoes, and I had a picture of what this dugout canoe would have looked like to share with you when they were using the Ohio River. They would use these dugout canoes for trade, to go up and down the rivers and creeks. And then they would also utilize the setting of the river they would utilize the fertile floodplains to take advantage of all the resources along the river, such as fish, mussels, and other wildlife. With the advent of agriculture, like I mentioned in the Woodland period, they realized, here's the canoe. Okay. They realized, oh, there we go. I got the screen back. So they realized that, these large floodplains were great for agriculture. Like today, you'll go along the rivers and you'll see large farms. So they started to settle here along the Ohio River, along these floodplains. And they also utilized a lot, like I said, they utilized a lot of resources. So the mussel shells, they realized they could use those for artifacts. They could also use them for trade, but they could also use them as a mortar for their pottery or as a temper. So they would crush the shells and include them into their pottery during the Mississippian period. And that's a good distinction for archaeologists. When they first started to make pottery, they would use limestone as the tempering agent during the Woodland period. But sometime during the transition from the Woodland to the Mississippian period, they switched to shell, which was a better temper. It's a finer grain. It bakes evenly. And it was just a better agent. So they immediately started switching to the mussel shell when that realization or that inventive or that technology took off. So, and I see there's a question. Maybe I can answer. Where was the largest Native American town?
Oh, that's okay. What we
Okay.
do, Jared, is we just type in questions, or I type in questions.
Okay.
Everybody types in questions, and we can review them at the end.
Oh, okay. We
Don't-
can do that too. So during the 1600s, you have the first Europeans that came into the Ohio River Valley or region. First with the French fur traders with Joliet and LaSalle down the Mississippi. They came a little bit up came down the Ohio, but then you also had the English back behind them. So the Ohio River became a very vital trading network, but also a security network. It marked a demarcation line a lot of times for treaties because it was easily recognizable. Forts were also set up along the Ohio River by both the British and the French. They had Fort Duquesne, the French had at where the Allegheny and the Ohio came together, Monongahela, and later became a French English fort. But so the Ohio River became a very important trade route. And then when after the American Revolution, the Americans started to utilize this vital network. They realized very quickly that the Ohio River was a great natural resource for trade and to get their goods down to New Orleans and to help with the security of their country. So as you can see, the Ohio River has been very important all the way up to that time. So during this time, as the Americans began to take over the river from after the Revolution, they realized there's a lot of impediments along the river. A lot of places they had to dredge. It might go dry during the summer, or it might go dry or it might get flooded. So they started to realize they needed to channelize the Ohio River, put in locks and dams to make navigation easier. So a crucial phase in the history of the Ohio River was the canalization project of the late 19th, early 20th century. And also, it began in the early 19th century, but it was an enormous construction project aimed to regulate the naturally fluctuating water levels of the river through the installation and operation of 51 lock and dam sites. And it was developed by the regional districts of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers between 1885 and 1929. It was at the time it was the largest waterway improvement project in the world. Congressional support of the improvements wavered through the 19th century, and you see that today with many of these infrastructure projects. I can point to the one at the end of the Ohio River, the Olmsted project. It took 30 years to finish that project due to funding, also design and engineering issues. So you can see sometimes political support wavers. It goes back, it ebbs and flows. But ultimately solidified to the early 20th century due to the interest of regional politicians, presidential administrations, and business interests. Despite the interruption of the World War I, a total of 51 lock and dam sites were completed along the river by 1929. The completion of the project supported a period of substantial growth in shipping coal, steel, and other commodities on the river by greatly diminishing the perils of navigation present in earlier periods. By the 1960s, many of the locks and dams, however, had become obsolete and the source of congestion on the Ohio. Gradually, the Army Corps removed the old structures and installed a smaller number of modern works. Like I mentioned, the last one of these was Olmsted, which came online in 2018. Historic context discusses, I'm about to get into the early navigation and waterway improvements starting in the early 19th century, and we'll go all the way up to present day. So, the Ohio River has been a transportation corridor of tremendous importance since prehistoric times, which we've already talked about. By the time Europeans explorers showed the river during the initial contact colonial periods, Native Americans were long familiar with the river, which they utilized as a trade route. And tribes along the river included the Shawnee, Cherokee, Osage, Miami, Delaware, just to name a few. There's other ones too. During that time, a lot of these tribes were also removed, so the river became a source of contention. Sometimes they used the river to remove the tribes to Oklahoma or to other points west during the expansion in the 1830s, 1840s. So rock snags, sandbars, and shallow channels along the seasonally changing depth of the river were aspects of the river that they could adequately manage with canoes and other types. Like I said, the dugout canoe, that seemed to be good at the time. But as farmers and other people moved into the region and cities began to grow, they realized they needed bigger navigation and bigger boats to haul the goods and services to support these growing river towns. So with the colonization, flatboats and keelboats were built to carry settlers and supplies down the river, but the many hazards along the route often frustrated navigation. These vessels became stranded on sandbars, ripped by rocks, and sometimes altogether lost under the waves just due to the hazards. Along with obstructions in the state, steep gradients, as well as long, stable pools, which we have one of these steep gradients out at the Falls of the Ohio, is a very major impediment during this time. The river also featured seasonal lows and high water fluctuations, as I mentioned earlier. Severe droughts might lower the water level by a foot. Floods might raise it as high as 80 feet. So that's a significant, those are significant drops in raises in the river. By the early 19th century, population was rising and settlement was spreading through the Ohio River. Ohio River, though hazardous, was a more dependable mode of transport than the rustic highways of the time due to Indian raids or indigenous people raids at the time, bandits. It was just not a safe way to travel overland. So the river still provided that, even with all these other difficulties, the river still remained a safer way to travel. Commercial crafts, including newly invented steamboats, piled the river. They often required at least 3 feet of water, a depth that was attainable only for a few months of the year. The fall and spring, when the river rose, were crucial shipping seasons for river mints. Yet even these seasons could be unpredictable, leading to injurious economic consequences for those who relied on the river for shipping. For example, in the fall of 1819, when the river simply did not rise, fortunes were lost because they couldn't ship. In the present day, the involvement of the federal government in large improvement projects such as river navigation and highway building is well-established tradition in American society. Just look at our interstates, locks and dams. It's expected the federal government will step in and help build these projects. However, during the early 19th century, at the start of our government, the government's involvement in such projects was a matter of intense debate. Secretary of Treasury Albert Gallatin was an early proponent of government sponsorship of internal improvements, calling for a federal road and canal system along the Atlantic seaboard, as well as roads stretching inland across the Appalachians to connect the Ohio River Basin. His 1808 proposal, sidelined by the War of 1812, reemerged and was revamped by Congressman John C. Calhoun after the war. President James Madison, however, stifled Calhoun's efforts on the grounds that such involvement of the federal government was unconstitutional. State governments, therefore, embarked on their own efforts. So it was left, during the early 19th century, it was left up to the state to handle how they wanted to develop the river. Led by Ohio, leaders in the states of Ohio River Basin formed a commission that sponsored a study of the river aimed at improvement. Completed in 1819, the study outlined problems and solutions for the length of the river between Pittsburgh and Louisville. The incredible investment required to amend the river, the commission discovered, could only be supplied by the federal government. A year later, Congress responded by funding a study of the remainder of the river and also the Mississippi River. Armed with these studies and a conviction that the federal government ought to control these inter-regional transportation corridors, Congressman Clay and Robert P. Henry, both of the river state of Kentucky, argued for federal sponsorship of improvements. Their efforts influenced the passage of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1824, the first of many such and you'll hear that term, the Rivers and Harbors Act. There's been multiple Rivers and Harbors Acts over the years. I think they're up to, I can't remember, but you'll hear that term over and over, and it'll have a certain year after it. So as you go through your research and you come across it, that's the history behind that Rivers and Harbors Act. They just kept adding it or amending to it. So this was the first of many acts that provided funding for improvements on the Ohio River, and it authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to oversee them. That's where our authority comes in from the Corps. The structural works of the Army Corps on the Ohio River in the 1820s, 1830s were experimental because, again, a lot of this had never been tried before. Major Stephen H. Long constructed a wing dam near Henderson, Kentucky in 1829. First federally sponsored installation on the river. This structure was built to increase the velocity of the channel in that area, which had barely a foot of water during low water stages. Long's wing dam prototype, sometimes referred to as a spur dike, was applied next to the grand chain of rocks near where the Ohio meets the Mississippi River in 1830, and also at various sites along the river through the 19th century. In addition to structural works, the Army Corps let contracts in the 1820s for the removal of estimated 50,000 snags along the surface and bottom of the river. By 1832, the Corps realized that they could claim that no watercraft had been lost in that year of the Ohio as a result of the snag removal efforts, which back then that would have been a very big claim to make. Cumberland Island was the next focus of the Army Corps' efforts to improve navigation on the Ohio. Located east of Paducah, Kentucky, where the Cumberland River meets the Ohio, the project area required the removal of a sandbar and installation of a channel diversion. Again, wing dams were the solution. The work was completed in 1834. A similar project followed between Wheeling, West Virginia, and Pittsburgh and at Browns Island in the same year, and more dams were installed at other sites later in the decade. Another monumental work on the Ohio River of the antebellum period was the Louisville and Portland Canal, Louisville, at the Falls of Ohio. For many years, shippers on the river were forced to transport their cargoes over land at this point to avoid the falls. The private Louisville and Portland Canal Company, so now it's a private interest, it's not, the state doing it or the federal government. So they undertook the work of building the 2-mile canal around the falls in 1825. After they learned they would have to carve the canal through solid rock, company's capital was quickly expended, and the federal government injected several $100,000 to sustain development. Completed in 1833, the canal had 3 lock chambers, with each lock measuring 50 feet by 180 feet. Keep that length of feet in mind, because later on we start talking about 1,200 feet length for a chamber. So you can see they increase over time. So you start from 50 foot wide to like 180 foot wide by 1,200 feet wide. In the initial 100 days of operation, over 800 ships passed through the lock. Gradually, the federal government acquired all the stock of the company, and it became the outright owner of the lock in 1855. Federally sponsored navigational improvements on the Ohio River were suspended during the economically depressed late 1830s, early 1840s. However, Congress with the blessing of President John Tyler, revived them with a new injection of appropriations in 1842. Work on the Ohio River in this period consisted of like snag boats. Again, they're removing the snags out of the river. They're building modest river works such as dikes. The dikes would help divert the river so it wouldn't cut into the stream and create a pool. The ascendancy of President James K. Polk in 1845 halted the navigational improvement projects, believing such work was unconstitutional. Again, there's that constitutional argument. He blamed the rivermen for the accidents on the Ohio and other rivers. Up to the time of the Civil War, presidential administrations and Congress restricted work on the Ohio River to only snag removal, despite increasing river commerce and navigational accidents. So this is the rise of slack water navigation. So what we have, typically what you see today, the constant pool. Numerous tributaries of the Ohio River, important connections to external markets, were subject to improvements in the antebellum period that later inspired the Ohio River system. Like the Ohio, they too were filled with navigational hazards in the antebellum period. On these tributaries, state and private funding cleared snags and removed rocks to broaden the flow of maritime traffic. There were also several attempts to create what was known as slack water navigation. These efforts, which consist of systems of locks and dams that regulated water levels by controlling depths, were installed in the Monongahela, Muskingum, Licking, Green, and Kentucky rivers in the 1830s and 1840s. While many of these projects suffered from lack of maintenance, natural disasters, or inconsistent revenues from tolls, and general abandonment during the Civil War, it nevertheless served as an example of a system that might be developed on the Ohio. The advent of railroad development on the Ohio River basin in the mid-19th century changed shipping on the Ohio River, the general dependence on rivers for transportation. It was generally becoming more reliable with the laydown of rail lines. Major influence on this change was the growing coal output, joining mining areas and accompanying national hunger for coal. Coal suppliers found it more economical to ship their product via towed barges as opposed to the individual coal boats utilized in the past. Barges of the period required depths of 6 to 8 feet of water. The Ohio seldom offered such levels. Business interests thus worked to influence the federal government to fix the Ohio River once and for all, to set that navigation so they could have that permanent 6 to 8 feet of navigable water. After the Civil War, federal government resumed investment in the Ohio River by sponsoring a new survey of the river through the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1866. William Milner Roberts, a civil engineer whose resume included work on the Erie Canal and the slackwater system of the Monongahela, performed the survey. Engineering and hydrological data he collected during his extended survey was utilized for improvement projects for years to come. His study also recommended what some considered a radical solution: a slack water project for the entire river. So it would be a constant pool from all the way from Cairo all the way up to Pittsburgh. So you could actually just move down and go to the next one. It would be a consistent pool. Ohio River Canalization Project. So in the mid to late 19th century, there was a key influence on the development of lock and dam system on the Ohio River. It was William Henry Emery Merrill. He was a West Point grad and a Union Army veteran. Merrill had experience in waterway improvements in St. Louis and Chicago. After he was appointed to lead the Office of Ohio River Improvements in 1870, he relocated the Army Corps office from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, and moved both practical and symbolic that indicated the growing focus on improving the entirety of the river, not just focused on Pittsburgh. Initially, Merrill oversaw upgrades to existing dams, removed obstructions, launched new dredge boats, installed, he just did the basic stuff, that was required of them. His agenda for the Ohio River was broader than that of his predecessors. Work of dredging, removing snags, and maintaining open channel, in his view, was beneficial to river traffic, but did not adequately address the inconsistent water level of the river that frustrated navigation. Merrill's answer was to canalize the river. 66, this is 66, I mentioned 51 earlier, so they didn't quite build all the locks and dams between Pittsburgh and Cairo. The project, which he estimated would cost $24 million, would offer a 6 foot of slackwater navigation on the river. A slackwater movement arose consisting of certain leaders, commercial interests in Ohio River Valley states. 1872, Merrill made his canalization plan official. Opposition to the movement came from towboat operators and coal shippers who feared locking dams would slow river traffic. Other opponents argued the pools between the dams would become stagnant. Rivermen in Pittsburgh were so opposed to Merrill's vision that they took to the streets with torchlights in protest. Facing opposition, Merrill searched for a compromise that would achieve the goal of a consistent water level, but also allow for open navigation to the extent possible. Movable dams, which could be raised to increase depths during shallow periods and lowered during the high water periods, could prevent the need for towboats to always pass through locks. Merrill found a conceptual template for the Ohio River on the Seine River in Paris, where engineer Jacques Chenoin had implemented, I'm probably saying that wrong, had implemented a movable wicket dam in 1852. The Chenoin wicket, as it was known, consisted of a large number of wickets, and that's what ultimately was used. Essentially boards that were 3 foot 6 inches by 13 foot. Wickets were hinged to a concrete foundation on the bed of the river. When the water level was low, a crew of men working on maneuver boats raised the wickets to the dam, the water, thereby creating a navigable pool that carried vessels from one lock to the next. In times of high water, the crew lowered the wickets, allowing vessels to travel freely over the dam without locking. Pools between each lock and dam site were known as slack water. And we have a link showing this maneuver boat in action, a YouTube link, and David, I'll send that out to the group that you can email, so you can email that to him here after the class. You can see how these wickets operate. Convinced they could create a navigable slack water and also practice the concerns of rivermen, Merrill recommended movable channelway dams for the Ohio River in 1874. To promote his plan, he needed to prove the structure worked. Thus, he initiated, with congressional support, the construction of the Davis Island Locking Dam in 1875. This experimental structure was intended to aid navigation in the Pittsburgh vicinity of the river. Delayed because of opposition from coal interests, the project did not commence until 1878. Years to complete, but when it opened in 1885, the 1,200-foot dam and 110-foot by 600-foot lock was the biggest in the world. Merrill's own design of rolling lock gate was another feature of the Davis Island development. So within several years of operation, the success of the structure quieted critics, and this launched the point for similar works along the Ohio River. So they demonstrated it. Inspired by this success, Congress authorized a study in 1888 to extend the slack water system from the Pittsburgh area to the Beaver River near the West Virginia-Pennsylvania border. The study advised a half dozen dams. Appropriations arrived over several years. However, this phase of river improvements produced only lock and dam number 6, the Merrill Dam, by 1906. The sluggish pace of construction was largely due to the high cost of construction, at the time $1 million per site. In the meantime, Merrill died in 1901. He would be remembered as the father of the Ohio River improvements. To assist in gaining congressional support for locks and dams on the Ohio, rivermen and shippers organized the Ohio Valley Improvement Association in 1895. The organization conducted publicity campaigns and led tours to members of Congress that drew attention to their quest for improvements to the waterway. Campaigning worked. In 1898, a new study reviewed Ohio from the Beaver River down to Marietta, advising 12 more lock and dams, numbers 7 through 18. Surveys continued down to Cincinnati in 1900. By the second year of the 20th century, Congress had approved 32 more lock and dam sites to the Indiana state line, bringing the authorized total to 50. An immense construction project such that the world had never seen on an individual waterway was underway on the Ohio River. Federal and local components of waterway improvements fueled the evolving Ohio River project. The presidency of Teddy Roosevelt and his successor William Taft, generally favored the waterway improvements. Ohio Valley Improvement Association remained adamant about improving the Ohio, even calling for the river depth to be increased from 6 to 9 feet, so they wanted to go even higher. Their reasoning was that modern barge tows, which had replaced the steamboats of old and carried 9 million tons of solid commodities downriver each year, drew more than 6 feet of water. Colonel Daniel Lockwood led a new study of the Ohio River to its mouth at Cairo in 1905. He concluded that a 9-foot depth was achievable if a total of 54 dams were constructed. Such an achievement would allow some 13 million tons of commerce to travel the Ohio each year. President Taft and Congressman Burton, both native Ohioans, influenced the 1910 Congress to approve Lockwood's plan. Estimated at $66 million, the construction of each lock and dam was targeted for completion in 1922. Again, another ambitious date. Progress on the Ohio River canalization project was hampered by economic shifts, decaying geopolitical situation in the 1910s. By 1916, the total number of completed lock and dam sites was 19. The same year, the volume of coal shipped down the Ohio bound for the Mississippi River sharply plummeted, largely as a result of the high demand for coal at steel mills in the Pittsburgh area because of war, probably at the time because of the ramp up to World War I. Railroad competition also pulled coal shipments from the area. The voices of critics rose again, crying the government's wasteful spending on the Ohio River project. Army Corps and river improvement supporters argued in response that the massive project could not reach its full potential until every lock and dam was completed. Development continued through the 1910s on more lock and dam sites. The outbreak of World War I altered supplies and manpower and the focus. So the goal of completing this project on the Ohio River by 1922 became unattainable. By the early 1920s, steel companies increasingly saw the value of shipping their product down the Ohio River. Jones and Laughlin Steel Corporation led the way in 1921. They shipped 4,000 tons of steel down the Ohio to the Mississippi at a great cost savings in comparison to the rail shipment. Other corporations, including Carnegie Steel, Wheeling Steel, and American Steel and Wire, followed suit. Soon, gasoline, coal, and oil companies in Kentucky and West Virginia began utilizing the river. These companies came to rely upon the river to support their bottom lines. They influenced Congress to return its focus on completing the development of locks and dams in a 9-foot waterway on the Ohio River. Congress obliged. In 1922, they appropriated $22 million toward the project. The new date for completion of the entire system was 1929. 51 lock and dam sites, the canalization project, though built by different Army Corps districts, Pittsburgh, Wheeling, Cincinnati, Louisville, and Huntington, featured relative consistency in design. And today it mentions those. There's only 3 left along the Ohio River. So you have Pittsburgh, Louisville, and Huntington districts. Wheeling and Cincinnati, I think, were either absorbed or there was some reorganization. So they featured the lock and dams featured a consistency in design to help with cost. Site selection was based on the physical nature of the river and proximity to important riverside shipping cities. Above Louisville, all lock and dams rested on rock or gravel foundations that were best suited to the riverbed in that region. Downriver from Louisville, they often were established on wooden and steel pilings. Each site consisted of a 110-foot by 600-foot lock chamber with Portland cement concrete walls. The walls were faced with timbers to prevent damage from passing vessels. Steel fenders later replaced these. The adjacent navigable paths ranged from 600 to 1,000 feet in length. The movable channelway wickets, championed by Merrill in 1875, were present at every station. They were often 16-foot long, but in some cases as long as 20 foot. Each site usually had 2 bear trap weirs measuring 91 feet. Merrill's rolling lock gate design remained a standby up to 1916 when they started using hydraulic mitering gates, which could better handle mud and sand deposits. Up to 1914, the local power supply at each lock and dam site was a steam plant or natural gas engine. Later designs utilized water turbines. In addition to lock and dams, the sites in the Ohio River also featured small residential complexes to house the lockmaster, his chief assistant, and their families. The residences typically were frame, brick, and terracotta homes. On call 24 hours a day, the lockmaster and his assistant lived on site. Other employees who performed maintenance, lowered and raised wickets, and conducted related work. They lived in nearby communities commuted to the site. These riverside lock reservations, as they were called, often were well-kept properties, and many later evolved into public recreation sites. I know I can think of one big one that comes to mind is I think it's in Shiloh, Clearmont County, Ohio. They've converted that into a recreational area. They incorporated a lot of the buildings. Begun in the last quarter of the 19th century, the canalization of the Ohio River via lock and dams from Pittsburgh to Cairo was completed. In September 1929, with the opening of Lock and Dam 53 at Grand Chain, Illinois. A week-long celebration ensued. A flotilla sponsored by the Ohio Valley Improvement Association left Pittsburgh bound for Cairo. The flotilla was greeted along the route by bells tolling, cannons blasting, and jubilees. President Herbert Hoover joined the flotilla at Cincinnati, traveling down to Louisville, where he delivered an address on an inland waterway development. The entire canalization project cost $125 million. the success and demise of locks and dams. Contrary to what the critics of the lock and dams projected, the tonnage shipped along the Ohio River system was enormous. 1930, 22 million tons passed through the system. After briefly dropping in 31 and 32 due to depression, and expanded to reach over 36 million tons by 1941. This tonnage primarily consisted of coal. As the United States became directly involved in World War II, the tonnage in petroleum and related products rivaled coal shipments. The canalized Ohio River also aided in the war effort by reducing pressure on railroad transportation and providing a safe inland passageway for cargoes that might otherwise be lost to submarine attacks in the Atlantic. Nearly 38 million tons of war-related commodities passed down the Ohio in just 1942 alone. This figure diminished as the war progressed, but after the war it nearly doubled and was fueled by industrial growth near navigable streams in the Ohio Valley. In 1953, 62 million tons flowed down the river, and many companies were developing river rail truck terminals. You see those today to ship coal, oil, gas, iron, steel, sand, gravel, chemicals, and automobiles on the Ohio River. As industry evolved to take advantage of the transportation revolution that was utilized the Ohio River, lock and dams eventually became outdated in comparison. Commerce on the river was more than 5 times the original 13 million tons that the system was designed to handle. Efficient operation of the wicket dams was susceptible to a number of challenges that made them troublesome. Weather was chief among them. Floodwaters could come so quickly that the dams could not be lowered or raised fast enough, because remember, you had to have a boat come out there to lift and lower the wicket dams. These activities had to be conducted in tandem with other lock and dam stations in order to adequately control river stages, so there's coordination involved. Floating debris created blockages sometimes as large as 10 acres along the lock and dams. Ice-coated operational equipment in addition to blocking the dams, leading engineers to resort to the dangerous work of butting ice away from downstream water. So they had to go out there and break the ice off the wickets. The Army Corps gradually took new steps to support the flow of traffic on the Ohio. Certain lock and dam sites were removed by 1938, reducing the total to 46. By World War II, there were 41. In the early 1950s, the Corps was planning a comprehensive modernization of the system that would remove the majority of the original wicket dams. Some of the old wicket sites would be replaced with high-lift, non-navigable gated dams with higher, deeper pools. The new locks would be 110 foot by 1,200 foot and capable of handling the largest tows on the river in a shorter time. The Corps also would build lock and dam structures at a handful of new sites. The Army Corps embarked on the Ohio River Modernization Program in 1954. First structures were operational a decade later. The largest developments were the widening of lock and dam number 41 at Louisville and the construction of the William H. McAlpine lock and dam. Through the 1960s and 1960s and 70s, the remaining lock and dams of the Ohio River became outdated. In this period, towboats generally pulled more than the standard 10 barges along the river. Many of the locks and dams simply could not handle the traffic of this nature without substantial delays. The Army Corps developed a longer locks at several of the sites. In 1985, the Louisville District conducted a feasibility study of the length of the river. The study recommended the replacement of lock and dam 52 and 53 with the Olmsted Lock and Dam project to be constructed in the vicinity of Olmsted, Illinois, which was due west of lock and dam 53. And just to give you context, 52 and 53 are the last 2 dams on the Ohio River near Cairo, Illinois, down where it meets the Mississippi River. This new site at Olmsted would consist of identical locks, 110 foot by 1,200 foot, and a dam in addition to a 1,400 foot wide navigable pass controlled by 140 boat operated wickets. Construction on this $775 million project began in 95 and just was recently completed in 2018. So as you can see, it's a rather complex history for the, there's a lot of finagling, there's a lot of people interested in the river, a lot of interest on the river, a lot of politics involved with the river, with creating the pool. You can see how it got to where we are today with the projects. And I mentioned that the Corps had been retiring a lot of these locks and dams and then building the new ones. So a lot of times when they retire, just to give you a history of, how that process of how when the Corps retired, because we're going through the last one at Lock and Dam 52, 53, so I can speak to that. So when Olmsted became operational, the Lockmaster House, all the housing, all the other facilities associated with the Lock and Dam, including the Lock and Dam, were still present. So the Corps' plan was to access the property as through the General Services Administration as excess property. So we're still in the process of doing that. The Corps is currently working to, before they even get rid of it, they try to see if anybody wants the buildings. So we reached out, 52, that's Brookport, Illinois, that's nearby. There was a group there that came together and they wanted the property, but they only wanted 2 of the buildings and the fence around the property. They didn't want any of the other housing or the Lockmaster House or any of the other facilities. So we're in the process of tearing those buildings down. But before we could tear those buildings down, we had to have a memorandum of agreement developed, because all those properties were considered historic properties. So we had to document those structures before we tore them down. So I've been working to do that. We also, in that memorandum of agreement, agreed to develop a book, a history of Lock and Dam 52 and 53. It's going to take about 2 years to develop. It's going to include interviews with people that lived in, worked at the locks and dams, to get their perspective. And we're really excited to see that when that gets done. It hasn't started yet. We're getting ready to begin that. Trying to think of some of the other. I see there's a lot of questions here, and I've been talking for a while. But there's a lot of questions. Let me see if I can get some.
Jared?
Yeah, David, sorry.
That's okay. It was a fascinating history, sort of focused on the Corps, that's your job. And I'm just fascinated with the Native American life. But,
okay.
Russ has a question here that I'm going to turn the machine over to him.
Okay.
And maybe he can start off with.
Hey, Russ.
Hey, Jared. Jared, as we, as a country, start to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, particularly coal and petroleum, which represents the bulk of what's being transported on the Ohio River, what do you see as the future of the lock and dam system? Is there any reason to continue maintaining these facilities?
That's a great question. And yes, there is a need to keep these facilities, because besides doing the navigational part, they also act as flood control. So we have to keep that in mind. They work in concert with all the other lake projects. We have 20 other lake, well, we used to have 20, now we're at 17. So we have other lake projects that feed into the Ohio River. So so these locks and dams along the Ohio River help with that flood control effort. So yes, that part of the project might be diminishing, but the flood control aspect, I feel, is going to become more important with climate change, some of those other things coming in. So there might not be shipping as much stuff, but the flood control aspect definitely is still there. So yeah, we need to continue to maintain these locks and dams.
And one last question, has there been any thought of, instead of tearing down all of the lock master homes and buildings, of converting those buildings to environmental education centers focused on the river? So almost all of our students that are on this conference call have lived on the Ohio River most of their lives. Most of them knew very little about the river. And that's pretty common throughout the areas. Should we be doing more on environmental education? And should that be something that these students could focus on as they're putting together plans for the three cities?
Absolutely. So, when we did I kind of gave it a broad brush when I said tore down the buildings. We worked with 18 different consulting parties. So we identified local entities, local cities, local nonprofits, tribes, the states, We worked with a lot of different groups before we made that decision that that's what we were going to do with the properties. And we tried to find people or organizations that were willing to take these buildings over. A lot of times there's caveats involved when you take over the buildings. You have to maintain their historic character, which costs money. We all know that. You have to keep up the character. You have to keep up. I mean, there's just a lot of different things. Plus, the two examples I mentioned, 52 and 53, they are in remote places. 53 especially, it's all the way down by Cairo, and it's a remote area. It's hard to get to. It's hard to navigate to. So we worked with the Historical Society down there. They did take a lot of the items that were in from 53, and they've kept a lot of some of the items from the site.
You froze. I'm not. There you go.
Oh, was I not talking? Oh,
Uh,
sorry. That's my phone.
That's okay. It just said our.
Yeah,
It said our internet is unstable, but we can still hear you.
Okay, great.
There's a couple other questions that we can't get to all of them, but several questions were about the Native Americans, and your specialty really is in archaeology.
Yeah.
And could you just expand a little bit upon the archaeological resources? Is there places to go that people could find out more information about this? Or
Absolutely. So if you ever in Evansville, Indiana, there's a place called Angel's Mound. They have a fantastic display of archaeology, of what they did, and it's right there on the river, and they do a great job. Another one in Kentucky is Wycliffe Mounds in Wycliffe, it's west of Paducah. Here locally, Falls of the Ohio has a great museum that offer, right across the river in Indiana. They have a wonderful exhibit for archaeological, explaining the history, the prehistoric history of along the Ohio River, especially at the Falls of the Ohio. I'm trying to think of some other ones, but those are three good ones. That
I've been to all of them, and Angel Mounds, if people are interested in this, is that town was there for thousands of years, and they traded all the way down to New Orleans, up the Mississippi. Well, it wasn't New Orleans at the time, but extensive trading patterns that were very well documented. A huge town.
So they would trade. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Dave. So they would trade for copper from Upper Peninsula. This shows you the extent that they would use rivers or just their trading networks. They would trade for pipe. They call it pipestone. Minnesota. You can see it's all the way down to Indiana. Conch shell from the Gulf of Mexico. So they would trade for all these different things and bring it all to Evansville or these areas to make into different ritual objects or just crafting in their villages. So yeah, there's all sorts of wonderful things.
I just wanted to ask one last question, and we'll get you all these chats for later on. But
absolutely.
My last question is, our class is focused on New Albany, Jeffersonville, Clarksville, and in part Louisville. Is there a historical aspect or a historical event or a couple events that you feel are the most important and the least understood right now for our southern Indiana towns, that if they want to develop some more historical aspects of it, what would you recommend?
Well, one that comes to mind, because I had to work with it on the Louisville flood wall, is the flood of 1937. That was a very major event. And I think people just, especially now with climate change and things like that, I think that's a great event to try to get people to understand the flood aspect and how it impacted the city and what kind of and frankly, that flood event caused us to do the flood walls, a lot of these infrastructure projects along the river. So you go along the river and you see all these flood walls. That's where a lot of those were from the flood of 1937. So that'd be one thing. I heard Civil War. Unfortunately, Louisville was not knocked out, but the war happened the battles happened so fast, and the battles went south. Just really wasn't a lot. There are Civil War sites in Louisville. I did hear the Underground Railroad is another one. I know Louisville was a major, fortunately, a slave trade area because of the proximity of the river. So that might be something that maybe not is understood. And the Native American aspect. We had the Falls of the Ohio. Transporting, getting around those falls was a major aspect, especially on the Indiana side. So that might be something worthwhile to explore or do an interpretive sign, or even a native, the Native American side of that. You could easily work on that or do.
Well, to totally change the subjects and bounce around, the Army Corps of Engineers is the largest provider of outdoor recreation spaces in the United States. Do you have any recommendations for us to consider? Because that's what these students are going to think about, is enhancing the outdoor recreational opportunities. So here, right there by the falls is the Falls of the Ohio Wildlife Refuge, managed by the Corps.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions or thoughts about the future of outdoor recreation on the Ohio River and how it might interact with the Army Corps of Engineers?
So that's a good question. We've been doing interpretive, one thing's interpretive signage, along greenways, things like that. Reaching out to your local nonprofits in the area, in your city. I know I'm working currently with the Naval Museum, Louisville Naval Museum. We're working to bring the maneuver boat from 53 over to the correct me, David, is it the Jeffersonville Wharf over on that side?
Yeah, the Jefferson right downstream of Jeff Boat.
Yeah, the Jeff Boat. So they're going to park, ultimately they want to park the maneuver boat from 53 over on that side. We're still working on disposal. We have to work through the GSA. But ultimately, you might see that boat on the other side of the river as a element. And the Louisville Naval Museum might need help interpreting that boat, developing signage, developing history, things like that. So that's one aspect.
I've never heard of the Louisville
Naval Museum.
Naval Museum.
They're bringing a submarine. They're bringing a PT boat. They got all these wonderful plans that they're wanting to set up this museum. And they wanted to talk about the Ohio River history and navigation. So they thought this boat would be a good way to do that.
Where is it? Or is it a virtual museum, or is
no,
it?
They haven't started. They're still working on it. I can give you the contact information.
Please.
I'll send it to you.
That'd be
but
great.
It sounds like something that your class maybe could help them with, or maybe that's something you could work with with that, because they're looking for the navigable history of the Ohio River. So, but just reaching out to getting back to your original question, which was how can the Corps or how can the groups tie into the history, or the just reach out to your local groups. Work, you can reach out to me if you want to. David's got my point of contact, and maybe we can. A lot of times it's just a matter of reaching the right person, talking to the right person, and just seeing if they know someone that can get you in the right. That's been my experience. It's just trying to find that one person that knows that one person that you need to get to. And I think David could speak. He's nodding his head yes. Making those contacts and making those.
Well, we will certainly share your information and your contact information with the students, and please get in touch with him. He's a busy guy, but and we'll go through the questions that weren't answered and see if we can work on them this Thursday. I said we were going to give you the last 10 minutes. We do have this quiz that I think will only take 4 or 5 minutes. So if the rest of the class for the period till your next 6 minutes, you're welcome to log on and do that quiz, or you could do it afterwards because some of it might require talking to other people. I wish to thank you very much, Jared, and look forward to working with you. And I'm just fascinated with this Louisville Naval Museum.
I thought you knew about it. I'll definitely get you the contact info. They'd probably love to talk to you. So.
Well, why, thank you very much. And Just as a reminder for everybody, we are in person this Thursday, and come ready to think about projects, talk about work, talk about the Louisville exhibit.
And send me the questions, David, and I will respond to each of these in kind, and you can get those to them next week or something.
Will do, and maybe if you could, when we send me your PowerPoint, and I'll share it with the students. And so
Okay, I'll
they
send you
get
the maps I had.
photographs.
Okay, great.
That'd be
Thanks,
wonderful.
everybody. Hope
Thank
you learned
very
something.
much.
All right, I'm signing off.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you on Thursday. Bye.